I thought the work was great. I thought the standard of the work was great. I thought the thinking and the insights. I thought they were doing work for some really tricky categories like banks and insurance companies, and yet they were producing really, really interesting things. And the production values, you know, one of these ads was filmed and it was like incredible, the way it was shot, the way it was graded. And I think across the board, the work was of a very high caliber and a very high standard. But as reflected in the results, there were no Grand Prix. Because I think to win a Grand Prix anywhere, it's got to be one of those things that after we're judging and we break for lunch before we go back in for an entire afternoon of more judging, you got to be like at that table with all your fellow judges going, holy shit, that thing that they did for that thing, I wish I'd done that. That was just something that will stay with me. And we know those campaigns, we know them globally, you know, the Honda Gur, Dumb Ways to Die, these campaigns that have made such an impact, and they've transcended advertising and design, and they've entered into like public conscious and popular culture. So again, that's my criteria for Grand Prix, and it should be the standard that the Loeries set as well, which I think they did. That being said, there were 2 golds, and I think there were 8 medals, 8 gongs, which is incredibly generous. I think there weren't as many last year. The golds were fantastic, and I think what I loved about the golds was there was a non-for-profit type one that was from the Middle East, and then there was a local one from the continent, which just goes to show you the reach of this award show and the territories it's spanning into, and that there are really interesting pockets of creativity throughout the entire region. It's not just siloed in one space. The one Rand man. I mean, it was such a, again, cliche, you'll hear this from everyone else, simple idea, a beautiful sort of personification of this thought and the idea of saving and spending and people's relationship with their money through the course of a day, through the course of a paycheck, from month to month, however. And it was just interesting. Like, usually if somebody talks to you about finances, you've tuned out by now. And the way that story was told was kind of like episodic, and it was just clever. It was smart. And I think you could tell that sort of thing is something that the client probably felt uncomfortable about. I would have if I were the client. And so I applaud the creatives and the agency and everybody actually who push for that type of work, because A, I think it made an impact, and secondly, I think it was a brave thing to do and not just approach things in a conventional way. So I really like that. So the other gold was a really beautiful, like, pure thought around this incredible insight, and it was from one of the Middle Eastern, it was, I believe, a Middle Eastern entry, and it was also a Middle Eastern insight into one of the countries whereby the women in that country sort of begin to feel like they're losing their identity because they are referred to by the name of their firstborn. Male, I believe, which sounds a bit complicated, and I think it's obviously traditional, and I think in that society that could be the way they do things, but the effect, I guess, that it goes on to have on the women, especially when she's no longer being called by her name, and the issues that has on her as an individual was incredibly well demonstrated, and the story was told brilliantly. So what they did was they encouraged people to use social media, Twitter specifically, and change their profile names to their mother's names, which is a huge step, which is a bold step, and it's inherently viral, so to speak, because it's Twitter. So you'll be not only changing your name, but you'll be publishing it and broadcasting it to people every time you tweet something. So again, incredibly simple, but really sort of ingenious in terms of the approach they took to dealing with this cultural phenomena that's happening in Egypt. There was a polarizing entry that after discussion got moved up quite a bit. from the shortlist to ending up getting a medal. And it was something, again, that was incredibly insightful, but executionally polarizing. And that just happens. I mean, we're in a creative business, and people bring a lot of themselves into the room, and you can't help but do that, but that's why they bring people from all over the world, because you have different backgrounds and different reference points, upbringings, all these sorts of things that make you think about creativity the way you do. So I think when we saw this entry, initially some people, I mean, it was incredible when we were going through the scores, you know, from whatever, 0 to 100, they were literally 20 or 80, you know, they were like that. So it had made a huge impact on certain people, and other people completely dismissed it. But after some really good debate and discussion, it got onto the shortlist, and then it got on to win an award. And I think it does deserve it. And it's interesting, it wasn't, obviously there was no one from the representing agency in the room, but it was just interesting how these ideas affect people in different ways. I did want to say one more word though, which was the stuff that I personally loved, and the reason I come to places like this, and thank you for having me, is I love the stuff that is so culturally relevant and specific to a market like this, and especially Africa. And I loved the One of a Kind and Made of Black. They were two of my favorites, and that wasn't because, oh, like you're in South Africa, but I loved like the One of a Kind, talking about some good things, some bad things about South Africa, but at the end of the day, it's what makes you South African. And then the Made of Black, I loved. I just thought like, it's easy sometimes for people to look at developing nations in a certain way, and I loved the pride, and I loved the attitude and the confidence that it exuded, and it was so like in your face. And I think anybody who saw that Made of Black film and some of the print and the crafting that went into the posters and that sort of stuff would look at Africa in a very different way, and I loved it, and it was just so African.